Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes to give people a chance to join. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We'll be getting started in just a couple minutes. So for those of you that just joined, I just wanted to say welcome, and we'll be starting in just about a minute or two. We're just going to give people a little more time to join. Thanks for coming, everybody. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone. Today's event is part of the Regional Educational Laboratory Program administered by the U.S. Department of Education, Institute of Education Sciences. The 10 regional educational laboratories, or RELs, work in partnership with stakeholders to conduct applied research and trainings. The REL mission is to support a more evidence-based education system. Through the REL program, we carry out 3 main activities. First, we conduct a wide variety of applied research studies. Second, we provide educators and other stakeholders with training, coaching, and technical support needed to use research, findings, and evidence in the classroom to improve teaching and learning. In today's webinar, we'll be sharing materials that were originally developed through a technical support project that REL Appalachia conducted during the 2020-2021 school year with a group of districts in Eastern Tennessee. Finally, webinars like this one are part of REL's efforts to disseminate findings from research in ways that educators and policymakers can use in practice. In short, the REL program offers support to state education agencies, local education agencies, and schools that helps practitioners use evidence-based practices. This isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. We at REL Appalachia are working with our states and districts on quite a diverse set of projects. In the Appalachian region, we partner with a variety of state and local stakeholders in Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Virginia to work on several education-related issues, including improving post-secondary transitions, early literacy, using data and evidence across states, and more. For more information about the projects we're working on, we encourage you to visit the REL Appalachia website. I have a hunch this isn't your first time participating in a Zoom meeting, but still I'd like to highlight the chat feature. We'll be using the chat feature today to gather your responses to a number of prompts, and you can also feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. It's important to note that when you're adding your ideas to the chat, use the drop-down menu that I've circled on this slide to select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see what you're sharing. Now I'll turn it over to Beth.
Thank you, Mary. So let's start by reviewing our agenda. As you can see here, we will begin with a welcome and introductions. Then we will describe our purpose for today's webinar and provide a little background on the research before moving into part 1 of the webinar, which is about student engagement in a remote setting. Part 2 will be about monitoring student progress and providing feedback for remote learning. As part of this webinar, we are also providing a handout packet. This packet contains the 4 handouts listed here. These handouts provide more detailed descriptions of the research we'll be discussing today and information about free digital tools that can help monitor progress and provide feedback. We will share the handout packet in the chat now. When you see this document icon on the slides, it's a signal for you to refer to your handouts. As we mentioned previously, today's webinar is based on a series of 3 Train the Trainer workshops that REL Appalachia delivered in partnership with educators in Tennessee last year. If you'd like to dig even deeper into the content of today's webinar, all of the materials from these workshops are available on the REL Appalachia website. We'll drop the link to where you can find those materials in the chat now. So we would now like to give you all the opportunity to introduce yourselves. Using the chat, please provide your name, organization, and your experience with remote instruction. I saw that Letitia already introduced herself. Thank you so much. Welcome for. All right, I'll just give you all a minute. Hello, Maria, welcome. Substitute teacher as well, thank you. Yeah. Okay, it looks like we had quite a bit of remote instruction last year. Lots of remote training since March, that's great. We have a lot of participants here today, so we're excited that you're all able to join us. Okay. Right, we have Mandy, yep. Okay, so we had developed some training and instructional supports for remote instruction. So it looks like a lot of you have had experience this past year, which is not surprising. All right, so wonderful. Thank you all for being here today, and you can review each other's information as we move on. All right, so now that we know a little bit about you all, we'd like to take a few minutes to introduce ourselves as well. So, small effort to get to know each other. We will each share who we are and a favorite quote. So first, I'm Beth Peary, and I'm a project team manager for REL Appalachia. And my quote is from Dr. Seuss, which is, "You're never too old, too wacky, too wild to pick up a book and read to a child." And as a working mom of 2 young children, I like to add "never too busy" to that quote as well. So I will put that in the chat for you. I'm also joined by 4 of my colleagues who you'll hear from a lot today. So now I'd like for each of them to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, I'm Mary Clute. I am from REL Appalachia at SRI International. And my quote is from Dolly Parton. "The way I see it, if you want the rainbow, you got to put up with the rain."
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Pellerin. I am a research associate at SRI International. And my favorite quote is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And that's from cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead.
Hi, I'm Jill Marcus with REL Appalachia. I'm a technical assistance provider. And my quote is from E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web. And it goes, "I arise in the morning torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. This makes it hard to plan the day."
Hi, everyone. My name is Imnet Shibare, and I'm a research associate at REL Appalachia. And my favorite quote is by James Baldwin, and it says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced."
Great, thank you, everybody. So in addition to the presenters, We also have 2 guest speakers who we'll be hearing from today as part of the webinar. So these guest speakers are Mandy Cannon and Dr. Jessica Ware, who are both instructional coaches from Sevier County Schools in Tennessee. They attended the Train the Trainer workshop series and then shared what they learned with educators in their district. And today, we'll be talking with them about what has worked in their districts and what tips they have for other educators. We'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge our partners who helped design the Train the Trainer workshop series on remote learning, which served as the foundation for today's webinar. These individuals from Niswonger Foundation and educators from Eastern Tennessee are listed here. Okay, so at this point, we'd like to get to know a little bit more about you. So we have a poll that's going to pop up. We'd like you to let us know if you're a teacher, school administrator, district administrator, or instructional coach. If none of these titles fit you, you can select other and then type your role into the chat. After you've completed the poll, please tell us how you or your colleagues will be using remote instruction going forward in the chat box. I'll just give you a minute to do the poll and then we can take a look at the chat. Okay. Yes, we can end the poll now. Let's take a look at the results. All right, so it looks like a third of people are teachers and about a third are coaches as well. We've got 23% who are other. Wonderful. And then I've been watching the chat come in and it looks like some people are potentially going to be doing remote instruction again. They just want to be prepared. That's great. There are some students that might need to be at home and have homebound instruction. So that's great that you're here. All right, so it looks like remote instruction will remain an important topic for many of us here today. So let's discuss some of the reasons remote instruction will still be relevant to educators moving forward. So first, we have the ongoing nature of the pandemic. Unfortunately, it's not over yet. Students under 12 won't be vaccinated by the fall, so remote learning may still occur if there's temporary closures to an outbreak or families can opt into virtual learning options. Next, some districts are interested in virtual schools or having permanent remote learning options, such as tutoring, after-school programs, or office hours. There's also potential for remote instruction to address teacher shortages in different parts of the country. Remote instruction may also support the continuity of student learning during natural disasters and weather emergencies. And additionally, the pandemic prompted tech companies to focus on digital learning. And so there will continue to be new or enhanced learning technologies that can support teaching either remotely or in the classroom. And then lastly, even if classes are all back in person, a lot of these new remote learning skills and tools can still have in-person applications. For example, if a school has one-to-one devices, educators can continue to use many of the digital tools used during the pandemic in an in-person classroom, or they may consider creating more collaborative asynchronous learning opportunities instead of, say, traditional homework assignments for students. Educators and students alike have learned a lot of new skills this year. Therefore, it's important for many educators to still enhance their skills to effectively teach students either in a remote setting or using remote learning skills to improve in-person learning opportunities. So the purpose of this webinar is to present the research and strategies regarding 2 topics relevant to remote instruction and discuss how these can be applied to a variety of contexts that you may find yourself in. We also want to note that although a great deal of research has been conducted on the topic of online learning, much of it has been conducted in different contexts. For example, many studies have been conducted in higher education settings. And although not all of these strategies we'll share today have been rigorously tested by researchers with K-12 students, we've based our presentation on the best available research and research that we believe can translate into your current context. So now I'll turn it over to Emma.
Thanks so much, Beth. Our first topic for part 1 of this webinar is student engagement. It is a critical topic regardless of whether students are in the classroom or online. We're going to take just a moment to give you the big picture of what we'll be talking about today regarding student engagement before we dive into specifics. Research on online learning has identified a wide variety of factors that are related to student engagement, including things that the technology can do to promote student engagement, things that educators can do to promote student engagement, and things that other adults, like parents or online learning mentors, can do to support student engagement. Today, we are going to focus on that middle one, things that educators can do to promote student engagement. Whether your students are in person or online, there are 3 types of engagement you should consider in your teaching practice. The research literature describes these types of engagement, which we are calling behavioral, emotional, and mental. Students might vary in their levels of each of these 3 types of engagement. They may also vary from class to class. How educators promote engagement may differ depending on the individual student's needs. We will be looking at each of these types of engagement, sharing what the research says, and then focusing on what you can do to promote each one in an online setting. In this model of student engagement, the green triangle illustrates the level of each type of engagement that the student can manage on their own. You can see that this triangle is relatively small. The yellow triangle outlines the amount of each type of engagement that the student needs for academic success. There is often a gap between the two, as illustrated by the white space between the 2 triangles. So that raises the question, what fills that gap for these students? 2 different communities, the school community consisting of teachers, other students, and school support staff, and the personal community, which includes families, friends, and peers outside of school, can provide the support to fill the gap. These communities are represented by the light blue and dark blue triangles. The researchers who developed this framework theorized that it doesn't matter which community provides needed support, as long as they have the relevant expertise to provide good support. Today, we'll focus on the light blue triangle. That is what you, as part of the school community that includes teaching staff, can do to promote student engagement. We will discuss some ideas for engagement strategies that you can use to support students to be academically successful. So now we'd like to administer another poll. Thinking about the students you work with and the modalities being used for teaching, which type of engagement do you think is the easiest to influence in an online environment? Behavioral, emotional, or mental? So take a minute to consider the 3 types of engagement that we have introduced and how well your students are doing with each type. Depending on your role, you might think of the students in your classroom, your building, or your whole district. So I'll give you guys a minute to complete the poll. I think that we can close the poll out now and take a look at the results. Okay, so it looks like that most people find emotional engagement to be the easiest to influence, although it is relatively close, especially between behavioral and mental engagement. So it's good to know that we'll be sharing research for that type of engagement as well as the others in the next section. We're sure many of you used some of these strategies during the COVID-19 pandemic. These are the strategies worth keeping in your tool belt in case you find yourself teaching online or in hybrid learning in the future or blended technology into the classroom. But many of these strategies can be applied in different settings and are not unique to remote learning. Additional information about the strategies that we'll discuss later can be found in handout 1, and you should have received a link to the handout in the chat. So now I'll turn it over to Mary.
Thanks, Emma. So the next few slides that we're going to present contain the information from handout 1, which is included in your handout packet starting on page 3. There are 3 sets of strategies or interventions that can promote behavioral engagement. The first set is troubleshooting and orienting. This set of strategies is about understanding what technology students have, how it is working for them, and what additional technology is needed. It is important to ensure that students and families know how to navigate any academic resources, including how to find resources they need on whatever platform is being used, and how to find feedback on their work. It is important to think about what kinds of things students might struggle with and provide guidance in advance. The second set of strategies includes helping students with organizing and managing their learning. The research suggests that in order to help students with organizing and managing, we should provide explicit instruction for students in how to self-regulate. Self-regulated learning strategies include things like supporting students to set goals, identify strategies to achieve their goals, monitor their progress toward their goals, and reflect on their accomplishments, informed by self-observation as well as peer and teacher feedback. Teachers can set up structures that support students to use self-regulated learning strategies, such as individual meetings with students to jointly set goals and monitor progress. The third set of strategies for behavioral engagement is monitoring and encouraging progress. Communicating frequently with students about their progress helps them to understand that they are accountable for making progress in their learning and that their efforts will be recognized. This means frequent, purposeful communication with students and other members of their learning network, including parents or counselors. It also means keeping track of how students are doing and following up if there are any signs that they are off track. It is also important to provide clear feedback to students about the extent to which their work meets expectations. Now let's turn to emotional engagement. To promote emotional engagement, consider ways to facilitate communication and develop relationships. One way to do this is to cultivate social presence. We attempted to do this at the beginning of the webinar when we, as facilitators, introduced ourselves and shared a favorite quote. You can cultivate social presence when you offer clues to your history, personality, and current circumstances. When you experience the social presence of another person, it feels like you are engaging in human-to-human interaction rather than human-machine interaction. It sets a stage for things like getting to know each other, developing a sense of connection, and developing relationships. Some other ways to facilitate communication and develop relationships are listed on this slide, including engaging in frequent and personalized communication with students and families, including synchronous or real-time elements like scheduled discussion groups to provide opportunities to build relationships, even when instruction is primarily asynchronous, being very intentional about establishing rapport. This might include asking more questions of students than you might do in a face-to-face setting, and building in opportunities for students to engage with one another to build relationships. This could be group discussions, group projects, or peer review of work. There is a real risk that students will feel isolated in online learning, so building community is especially important. In addition to facilitating communication and developing relationships, you can promote emotional engagement by instilling an excitement for learning. To achieve this, you might consider providing opportunities for social interaction through fun activities like scavenger hunts. Last year during remote learning, some teachers found it helpful to begin the day with motivational videos. Instructional activities that are intentionally aligned with students' interests can also help keep students engaged. This brings us to the last type of engagement. There are 2 sets of strategies that can help promote mental engagement. The first is using varied instructional techniques. You'll notice the first 3 bullets on this slide are all about the importance of feedback. We are going to be talking a lot more about feedback later on in this webinar. It is also important to challenge students, but also ensure that they have opportunities to be successful. As you do this, keep in mind that what's challenging in remote learning environments might be different from in-person environments. The last 3 bullets on this slide are all about instructional design. You'll find more information and resources in your handout related to active learning and instructional design principles. The second set of strategies to promote mental engagement involves providing opportunities for collaboration. All that we know about the importance of collaborative work is still true even in an online environment. It may take some creativity to structure cooperative learning differently, perhaps using breakout groups. This slide lists some suggestions for ways to both provide opportunities for collaboration and for structuring online discussions. Now I'll turn it over to Jill.
Thanks, Mary. That was some good information and hopefully gave you some good guidelines to think about and some feelings that some of the things that you're already doing are research-based and therefore things that you should keep doing. So now we have a chance to hear from Mandy Cannon and Jessica Ware, who we introduced earlier. And they're both instructional coaches from Sevier County Schools in Tennessee. And they worked with teachers in their districts to effectively use remote instruction techniques. So if you guys can go ahead and put your cameras on now, if you don't have them already. There you are. Okay, so starting with you, Mandy, can you talk about some of the methods that your teachers used to successfully engage students during remote or hybrid learning?
So I think the teachers who were the most successful in engaging their students created that bond that we have when we are in person with their remote students. So they did all kinds of things like during their lunch break, instead of turning everything off and the kids at home are eating their lunch and the kids here are eating their lunch, they left their meet open so that students from home could have conversations with the students that are in the class. And it wasn't structured, it wasn't class, related, just getting to be with their friends. And that gave the students more buy-in to their class because they felt like they were a part of it.
Great. That's lots of ways you can take that kind of example. Jessica, do you have ideas to add to that?
Overall, the same thing Mandy said. They really tried to, at first, I guess, really strengthen that connection with their students that they maybe weren't even going to see in person for several weeks. Younger grade teachers, I had them, or they had started some scavenger hunts with their students based on maybe the letters they were working on. They would go around their house and find something with the letter that they were working on, which got the students connected to the teacher and the class, felt like they were still a part of the class, even though, they were at home or somewhere else doing virtual learning.
Great. So Jessica, do you have advice you can share about how you think people might work to engage students as we move into the next school year, where there's remote learning perhaps in used differently?
I think, to really focus on, especially the beginning of the year when you get new students, if they're remote, virtual, to make that connection with them. It's easy to make a connection a lot of times with somebody in person with you, but when they're not in front of you, that's a difficult thing. There's some sort of barrier there, whether it's you don't see them in person or something, but continue that, strengthen that connection with them. We want to see people, like lay our eyes on them, and they do the same for their teacher. They want a connection with their teacher. So to continue to focus on that, I think would be success.
And that's a hard thing to remember sometimes, is how much the kids want that connection, because there are age groups of kids who that's the last thing they would ask for, but they still want it. So
they do. I agree.
So Mandy, what are your ideas about advice going forward into the next school year?
I advise teachers to be very intentional in that practice. If you have students in your class, you can see that you've not called on Sarah today at all. However, you're not looking at Johnny, who's at home, so you may forget to call on him. So be very intentional. I have a teacher or several teachers actually, they have just their morning questionnaire, and it's very general questions. What'd you have for breakfast this morning? How'd you sleep last night? Those kinds of things. And she can check on students' well-being as well as their mental health privately, but it's very intentional. It's the first thing that students do every day, and the teacher has to look at it before she then moves on with the day. So make a plan. If it's just to make check marks by who you've spoken to or who you have interacted with, have a plan for what you're going to do.
Yeah, I think that you're right. We tend to sort of know it in the back of our heads, but unless we have it like structured into the day, it's easy to let some of these small details go. So I have some additional questions. One is about the kind of engagement that your students seemed to need the most support with, and why. So Mandy, do you think your students needed the most support with the behavioral stuff, like the showing up and the doing the work, the mental stuff, where like the actual, knowledge they needed to finish the work, or the emotional, attachment to the classroom and, caring about school?
At the very beginning of last school year, we had a lot of students who needed help with the behavioral stuff, the showing up to class. Maybe the choices made weren't the best for the student and they aren't self-motivated, or so helping parents to help students make those connections from home was a big deal for the first 6 weeks of school or last year. And hopefully our teachers are a little more prepared this time to be ahead of that, to say, if you're going to stay home, these are the rules. Here's the parameters under which this works.
Yeah, without the behavioral, you can't get the mental or the emotional either. If the kid's not there, right? They can't be engaging with the schoolwork or feeling connected. Jessica, what about you? What kind of engagement did your students struggle the most with?
Again, I'd say the same as Mandy at the very beginning, behavioral, going through the routines that a teacher, and expectations a teacher's going to set, like you have to have your camera on. You can't, even though you're at home and you're learning from there, there are expectations. We do need to see you. We need to have a conversation with you, gauge where you are in this lesson, understand this lesson. So behavior was a big part of it at first, because I'm sure just like everywhere, across the country and the world, there are some students who were at home, lacking in supervision. And so the teacher really had to, reach into that device and just really, talk to the student and get them to understand that, this is how this is going to work. We need for you to, meet us halfway here and have these behavior expectations and stuff. And so I think once those got into place, because it was new for everybody, and every situation, it seemed, was very different.
Yeah.
So behavior was a big one. And I think just engaging them with some expectations and routines and best practices for their students helped along with, and then they could focus on the work that was being done.
And Jessica, can you say a little bit about if there were differences between the needs of your youngest students and your oldest students?
Yes, there was, but I think at the core of humanity, it was still a need of to be able to connect with somebody. I had a middle school teacher tell me, a virtual student, said to her, "I don't feel like I even know you. I really don't feel like I know you." And so I'm looking forward to the student was going to be coming back in person and getting to know you. And it was probably the third 6 weeks. And so I think at the bottom line, it was connection. But I think with younger students, yes, being in person is just makes such a difference. And being online with younger students, having to chunk those lessons, maybe even shorter than you would do with your in-person students. I think teachers had to learn to do that because, you have a 8-year-old at home, you've got to kind of chunk those things because they're not in front of you and you can't redirect that way. So I think that was different for younger grade students. Middle school students,
regardless of age, starting with the behavior first, like
yes.
Here's what we need you to do to show up to get your assignments done, and then only then can you start to work on the other types of engagement.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Mandy, can you talk a little bit about, were there anything that you saw or did or that your teachers did that did not work at all as far as trying to engage students?
In the beginning, lots of things didn't work. Just assuming that a child is going to do what they're supposed to do or that they're going to have help at home. We are a Google district, and so we use Google Classroom, and we had teachers post Google assignments, and that was it. We really needed more instruction for parents on how to use Google Classroom, how to use the device that they have at home now. When is class going to happen? When are assignments due? We had to learn what we didn't know. You know, this was all new, and hopefully we have a head start on that this time around, to be ahead of those instructional things that we just forget are important.
Yeah. I saw some examples of things like the problem with counting somebody as present if their camera was on and counting them as absent if their camera was not on.
Yes.
As a kind of having to make a shift in how you think about what does it mean to be present.
Yes. And what does it mean to be actively participating in this class? You know, if they're asleep in the corner, we count them present. So if they didn't, you know, we didn't see them on the camera, we may count them absent there. So there were a lot of learning hurdles along the way.
Yeah, and I know that I know of a teacher who tried giving the children points for having their cameras on and penalizing them for not having their cameras on, and
that can be backfire a little bit, you know, if
that's exactly what happened
in the background.
Yes,
so.
She got a lot of very upset emails from a variety of parents about why that was not appropriate. How about you, Jessica? Things that you saw that didn't work and that you would tell people to steer away from?
I think we learned also pretty, quickly on that holding to the rigors of a regular school day and what happens within the walls of the school, you can't hold students who are at home to those exact same requirements and expectations. They're, while they do have to, do the work and be present and engaged, it may not be exactly 8 a.m. till 3 p.m., depending on what is happening at home. So I think that was definitely a thing that we learned in this district. There has to be some understanding and some flexibility. It's not going to look the same at home as it does within the walls of the school. So figuring out what that is, again, there wasn't just a blanket fix for that. It was, class by class or school by school kind of fix, but your students at home may not exactly be able to get on it, depending on what they're having to do now that they're at home, those different responsibilities.
Yeah, I kind of feel like that's a big category of mistakes that were made in the beginning, which were just trying to make it business as usual. But now, as though it didn't matter that you were remote. That there was no difference.
Because we wanted to keep you to these expectations and we want to make sure you're learning. But when I'm at home working, it's different for me than when I'm out.
And it's something to keep in mind as we shift back, if to the extent that we want to keep ideas that worked in remote learning and use them in the classroom, it's different again, and you can't have the same expectations. They don't have their parent there to support them. They can't go run down the hall and get a snack when they're, there's shifts that we have, shift back that we have to make. Kids have to wake up early again. All of those things that we're going to have to make sure not to ignore as we move forward. Mandy, you have thoughts about that?
Yes, you said they might not have their parent there to help them, or they may have their parent there to help them. That may
too.
also be a problem.
Right. And so there's a lot to balance, a lot to think about as you work with these opportunities to provide education in a new way. Well, thank you, Mandy and Jessica. We're going to bring Mandy and Jessica back after the next section to talk to them again about the material we'll be covering in that part. But just to wrap up this first part of the webinar, I wanted to a quick recap. Sorry, I have to go back a slide. We talked about the 3 types of student engagement and the different types of strategies that can be used to support each one of them. And we made a short handout that provides a quick references for the strategies for each type of engagement. And that's on section 2 of your handout packet. And it's on page 9, if you want to find that. And it's just sort of something you might want to print out and have handy as you're thinking about engagement strategies. But now we want to give a chance for you to reflect a bit about this content and what you've heard. And we'd like to hear from you about what's worked for you and what hasn't. So if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat something that's worked successfully for you to engage students in a remote setting, a chance to share, your best ideas with the rest of the group here. And I'll do my best to keep an eye on those and read them as they come up. One of the best strategies I saw working with teachers was with kindergarten teachers, actually, they started giving students sentence starters for how to talk to each other online on the camera, because at kindergarten, their problem was that all the children talked at once. And so that they gave them a better structure for conversation within the remote setting, and that was very effective. And then we have talking about using things in their home environment and their personal interests as much as possible always makes it engaging, but thinking about, what's interesting to them at home is a new twist on that. Open-ended questions and giving students time to respond, that's a great idea. And some only respond through chat as opposed to, I guess other formats for responding. Oh, and games where you have the camera on, camera off. I've done some of those in workshops. Turn your camera on if you've ever done whatever. Playing games with the students, war and dominoes, online games, or games that you can play with objects in the home. Cards of destiny to call on students and allow them to respond on camera or via chat. And that's a nice comment there, that keeping in mind students' comfort levels with engaging, with being on camera or using the chat. It's nice that they have that opportunity. And sometimes in the classroom, wouldn't that be nice if instead of having to speak their answer to the whole class, they got to share it in a more private way? Lots of good ideas coming up here. Virtual tools, using annotation, and like taking advantage of the online tools. High school students using breakout rooms, yeah, and then the teacher cycling through those rooms to make, to make sure everybody's on target, and using chat to bring out those students who are often more reserved. I know an introvert colleague of mine has been so pleased with the ability to chat her ideas instead of having to speak up in meetings, and I think it's probably the same for students. Using fun backgrounds, yes, I've seen that. I've seen hats, wigs, crazy hair day online. Lots of things to liven up the interface. Protocols, right? So protocols not just for speaking, like I was talking about, protocols for using the chat, like waterfall, where students type their response and then they have to hold their response until they're told to hit enter, and then the responses come up. That way they're not reading each other's responses instead of thinking of their own. Yep, Jamboard, Google Apps, Flipgrid, all of the different tools. So you guys, we should, our team should capture some of these ideas and make them available somehow, because we know that everybody has had some successes and some, let's say, trials and errors, but that you need to all congratulate yourselves on how much you've learned, how much you've tried, and how much what the successes that you have had. And the fact that you're here today to learn about the research base for some of this work, and that you want to, keep doing the good stuff. Kudos to you all. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Mnet, who's going to talk about monitoring student progress and providing feedback.
Yes, thank you, Jill. So part 2 of this webinar discusses monitoring student progress and providing feedback. The information in this part of the webinar can be found in handout 3 of the handout packet, which begins on page 10. We will discuss research and strategies to help you better monitor student progress and provide feedback in a remote learning context. Although these strategies are particularly useful in an online or hybrid setting, many of these strategies and digital tools can be used with in-person classes as well. Before getting into strategies to monitor student progress and provide feedback, we provide background on formative assessment. This is a process that involves both gathering and using information about what and how students are learning. It takes place in a relatively short cycle, as frequently as moment by moment, daily, or weekly, and it guides just-in-time adjustments to help students learn. Formative assessment is closely tied to what we are talking about today, monitoring student progress and providing feedback. The first formative assessment practice is clarifying learning. This involves identifying the learning targets so students know where they are headed. It also includes helping students understand what it will look like when they are successful. The second practice is eliciting evidence of learning. This involves gathering information about where students are in their learning throughout instruction. One way to gather evidence is through questioning. Effective questions can stimulate students' thinking, provide evidence of what they know, and provide information about the errors or misconceptions they hold. The third formative assessment practice is providing feedback. Feedback should support students in moving forward with their learning. The goal of this feedback is to help them better understand the material, and feedback should be timely, promote reflection, and identify future actions. The fourth formative assessment practice is activating learners. Engaging in self-assessment, including setting learning goals and monitoring progress, can support students to develop a growth mindset and take more ownership of their learning. Strategies such as peer feedback can empower students to be resources for each other. And let's begin by talking about monitoring student progress. To support your use of formative assessment, it makes sense to begin with the digital tools you already have at hand. We are going to be talking about 3 different types of tools. If you were teaching remotely, we know that you are already probably very familiar with using the chat and poll features to check on student learning. So in this section, we will spend a little time talking about selecting just the right questions to ask to efficiently collect information about what your students know and can do. This can help you if you use chats and polls in remote learning in the future, and if you are using other technologies in person in the classroom. The second bullet mentions how you might use data that are automatically collected from instructional technologies you might be using. Then we will share examples of some free tools you might use to monitor student progress. To support your use of chat and polls to monitor student learning and behaviors, we are going to present some research on asking questions. The recommendations on this slide come from What Works Clearinghouse's practice guide on using technology to support post-secondary student learning. A practice guide is a publication that presents recommendations for educators to address challenges in their classrooms and schools. They are based on reviews of the research, the experiences of practitioners, and the opinions of a panel of nationally recognized experts. Although this practice guide is focused on post-secondary students, we think the recommendations could translate well to the K-12 remote learning setting. In particular, recommendation 4 from the practice guide focuses on using technology to efficiently gather real-time information about student learning using polls, chat, and other easily accessible tools. Check out page 11 of handout 3 for more information about implementing this recommendation. It describes the categories of questions presented on this slide and how they can be used in classrooms. Monitoring questions gives you information about how your students are approaching the learning process. For example, you might ask students how long they took to complete an assignment or how difficult they thought a reading was. While we have geared these question types to chats and polls, using the right questions to get the information you need about student learning and behavior can be used in other contexts as well. Additionally, you might also have access to data about student learning that you didn't even have to collect. If you were using instructional technologies, you may be able to generate reports that you can use to monitor student progress. This can save you time because you don't have to do anything to collect these data. Some examples include Dreambox Learning, Achieve 3000, and assessments. It might be worthwhile to familiarize yourself with the types of data these technologies provide and how you might use them to monitor progress. For example, how many minutes are students engaging with the program? Are there certain questions that many students are answering incorrectly? Some more sophisticated instructional technologies track how students interact with different parts of the platform. This can provide information about how students are approaching problems. These are data that are applicable in many learning contexts, whether it is remote, hybrid, or even in person. You can integrate the data from these technologies with the other information you have about students, such as what you observed during in-class lessons and knowledge you've gained from reviewing their completed assignments, to gain a more complete picture of student progress. See handout 3 for more information about the data you can gather from instructional technologies. In addition to using the digital tools you already have in your toolbox, there are lots of other free tools out there that can help you monitor student progress. This list of tools can be found in handout 4 in your handout packet, which begins on page 18. We listed some reasons why these other tools may be useful to you here. For example, if you want to integrate some new activities that also allow you to monitor students' progress, you could try Kahoot, which is a game-based tool that engages students while also capturing data to help you assess their learning. Or if you are looking for alternative ways for students to show what they have learned, you could try Padlet, which provides an online wall where students can post images and text. These reasons and tools are not only applicable in remote learning contexts, they may also be applicable to your in-person or hybrid classrooms as well. Throughout this presentation, we will share digital tools like these and others. We are not promoting any of these. They are just an example of what's available. With any of these tools, we strongly recommend connecting with IT professionals in your district or school to confirm that these tools comply with your district's data security and privacy protocols. Next, we will present an example of how you can use one of these technologies to monitor student progress. Nearpod allows you to create interactive lessons that can be integrated in your Google Slides. It also provides 9 formative assessment tools, such as open-ended questions, quizzes, polls, and fill in the blanks, that can be incorporated into these lessons. These lessons can then be shared asynchronously or synchronously with students. With the teacher view shown here, you can monitor student progress in real time as students submit responses. So here you can see who has and who hasn't responded to an open-ended question. In this example, I might send a private message to check in with John about why he hasn't responded. I can also share examples of student responses anonymously. Nearpod quizzes and poll features are different than polling in Zoom, for example, because you can see who answered and how in real time. This way, you can use the formative information to, for example, group students for additional instruction. If there is not enough time to review the formative data during the class, there is also a session report that stores all the responses so you can review it later. Pear Deck is a similar platform. These tools can work well in remote learning settings, but could also be used in other contexts as well. For example, if you have remote students and students in the classroom at the same time, you can use the same formative assessment tools simultaneously for both types of students. You could project the Nearpod activities on the screen for your students to do on paper or one-on-one devices in class, while the remote students complete it online. As you progress through the lesson and activities, all students will see the same screen no matter their location. Now I will turn it over to Mary, who will talk about providing feedback.
Thanks, Mnet. So another important aspect of formative assessment is providing feedback to students to support their learning. And now we're going to talk about how to provide feedback in a remote learning context, but a lot of the strategies that we're going to talk about could also be used in other learning contexts as well, and may be just as beneficial in supporting your students' learning. So we expect that you already know a lot about the characteristics of effective feedback, but to bring them to the top of your mind, we've designed this quick pop quiz activity. So for this activity, we'd like you to think about how you give feedback in general, not just in remote learning. And in the chat, please list any characteristics that you think of, such as timely or linked to learning goals. So any characteristics of good feedback. And then we're going to take a look at the list that we found in the research literature and see if there's anything else we should think about when designing feedback mechanisms. And just a reminder, when you're putting your ideas in the chat, be sure to select all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you write. So I'll just give you a minute to start putting things in. Pull the chat over so I can see it. Feedback should be specific. Yes, thank you, Charles. Timely, specific, personalized, descriptive, not things like just good job. Great. Motivating, I like that one. Connected to learning goals. Response to student output. Affirming, great, I like these a lot. Usable and actionable, great. Specific and positive. Awesome, all right. Well, so let's move on and we'll show you the list that we came up with. In our review of the research literature, we found this list that's on this slide, and this information is in your handout and packet on handout 3, in handout 3 on page 14. And you guys hit on so many of these. We saw clear and specific, offered a link to learning goals, tailored to meet students' needs, so personalized to the student. Some other things that that are on this list might be related to the timeliness. It's having it an action and it being actionable. It should be delivered in time when there's still time for students to use it. Is another one. Focus on the task rather than the student. So that's just sort of a list that we found. You guys, it seems you all knew a lot of that already, but hopefully that was a helpful refresher about feedback. And please know that these characteristics of feedback are important no matter what setting that you're working in. So like we just talked about, and a lot of you mentioned, one of the characteristics of good feedback is that it's delivered in time and in time to be useful, and that it needs to be manageable to both you and the students. So we're going to talk today about 2 ideas about how to accomplish those goals from the article Flash Feedback, How to Provide More Meaningful Feedback in Less Time. And there's a link to this article in the handout packet on page 15. So now I'm going to briefly describe each of these 2 strategies. So being able to provide focused feedback quickly makes it easier to do it more frequently. And the targeted response strategy is about giving feedback that is very focused on the learning goals. So here's an example of how you can use the targeted response strategy to give specific, individual, meaningful feedback in less than 1 minute per student. In this example, students were asked to write a 1-page paper on any topic they wished, with the only requirement being that they had to correctly use at least 4 examples of each type of comma the class had studied. Reviewing the whole paragraph and identifying all of the errors that students made could be very time-consuming. But instead, with the targeted response, you can use the find function in your word processor to highlight all of the commas in each piece. And this enables you to quickly scan for correct and incorrect usage. Another time-saving strategy is holding micro-conferences. Unfortunately, even a 5-minute conference with each student can take more time than is available. So to address this, you can carefully structure student conferences so that they only take about 1 or 2 minutes. So here's an example of how you might structure micro-conferences during a unit on paraphrasing. So you might start with having students write a rough draft of a paraphrasing paper and bring it to class. And then the class can read and discuss mentor text with strong paraphrasing. And then students can pick a page in their own drafts and highlight each incidence of paraphrasing. And then they can rate each paraphrase passage from 1 to 10 based on the exemplar and write at least 4 sentences justifying their rating. And then when they're ready, they can meet with the teacher for a brief conference with each student sharing their ratings, comparing them to the exemplar. Then the teacher can provide feedback to support them in improving their work. This approach uses time very efficiently. The students already have laid the groundwork and highlighted the paraphrase sections, and it allows the teacher and student to jump in right in at a very high level. And by focusing on just paraphrasing, a minute is not too short to go deep, answer questions, and figure out meaningful action steps forward for the student. Another option for providing feedback is to use recorded feedback. Most of the research on audio and video feedback has been done in university settings, although we did find one study that examined the use of this type of feedback with middle school students. but younger students might need more support to benefit from this type of feedback. Using audio and video feedback can effectively provide information to enhance learning, which is one of the characteristics of effective feedback that we talked about earlier. This research suggests that students had positive perceptions about audio and video feedback. They found it motivating, they felt comfortable receiving it, and they found the feedback to be more personal than written feedback. Some research also suggests that teachers need not be too concerned about investing a lot of time into the production value of audio and video feedback. Students preferred receiving unedited feedback more promptly than waiting more time for edited feedback. So finally, we found one study that compared the use of audio feedback and written feedback. And they found that the type of feedback students received was not associated with how well they did on the assignment, suggesting that audio feedback may be as effective as written feedback. It's easy to see how audio and video feedback are applicable to teaching in a remote setting, but given the research, there may be benefits to using this type of feedback in other learning settings as well. And further details about this research can be found in handout 3, beginning on page 15. So now I'll turn it over to Beth.
Thank you, Mary. There are lots of free audio and video recording platforms available that are easy to use and do not require much, if any, editing. So some examples of these video and recording tools are listed here. There's Screencastify, Hippo Video, or TinyTake. We also note that your computer may have a program for recording your screen or audio already. All of these digital tools are described in handout 4 of your handout packet on page 18. Again, we're not promoting any of these. They are just examples of what's available. There are a couple of things that you should pay attention to when selecting an audio or video platform. Consider any time limits to recording, any advertising with free versions, how difficult it is to learn, how easy it is to edit and share, the security of the tool, and how well it's integrated into your other platforms. So let's see an example of how we can provide student feedback using one of these tools. So Screencastify is an example of a tool that you can use to record your screen as you provide feedback to students. It has a free version without ads that allows us to record 5-minute videos. So here's an example of me giving video feedback to one of our students from the earlier Nearpod example. Hi, Eva. Thank you for completing the rainfall assignment. I appreciate how you provided the average amount of rain and the number of days of rainfall per year in Seattle. Can you find that information for Austin and Johnson City too, and add it to your paragraph? This can help you answer the second part of the assignment, which is not clear yet in your paragraph. So once you've reviewed all the rainfall information about each city, please pick which city you would like to live in if you liked rain. Then clearly state which city you chose in your paragraph and write 1 or 2 reasons why you picked this city. So in this video, hi Eva, thank you. So in this video, I tried to follow the characteristics of effective feedback. For example, I provided targeted feedback that linked back to the goal of the exercise. You'll notice that I did not correct capitalization or spelling errors because I was prioritizing my feedback to save time and keep the feedback manageable. I also provided feedback to enhance learning and not only correct responses. For example, I asked her to find additional information that would help her complete the assignment more effectively. Additionally, I included a video of myself as I provided the feedback to add a personal touch in a remote setting. And since I was in a browser, I also used annotated tools to draw attention to key areas and help provide clear and specific feedback. To save time, I didn't edit the video, so I could just send it to the student in a timely fashion. Remember, research shows students prefer timely feedback over highly edited videos. So this example used Screencastify, but as I mentioned, there are many other tools out there, and a lot of them work in a similar fashion to help provide feedback in whatever context you're in. Another type of feedback to consider is peer feedback. So this can provide a great opportunity to empower students to be resources for each other. It can be an effective way to deliver feedback when there's still time for it to be used, which is one of the characteristics of effective feedback. Research suggests that when students provide feedback for each other, they can increase their own understanding of the subject matter. The process of providing feedback to a peer enables them to see how other students approach the assignment, which may prompt self-reflection and may motivate them to improve their own work. Furthermore, the act of providing feedback is complex as it requires students to assess the extent to which their peer met the expectations for the assignment, which requires critical thinking skills. And then they need to effectively convey their feedback, which provides an opportunity for them to practice their developing communication skills. So given the benefits of peer feedback, it's a type of feedback that could still be applicable moving forward in whatever setting you're teaching in. Moreover, all of these potential benefits of peer feedback can be realized without necessarily increasing teachers' workload. So further details about this research can be found in handout 3, beginning on page 16. The research we reviewed suggests 2 considerations for implementing peer feedback. First, you might want to think about how to support students to provide quality feedback by providing some structure, such as a rubric or a form for them to complete for their feedback. Another issue to consider is whether or not to make the feedback anonymous. So the research that we located suggests that students give feedback of similar quality when they are anonymous or identified. However, students may prefer to give their feedback anonymously. So now that we've reviewed the benefits of peer feedback and the research for implementing it, we'll briefly discuss some of the digital tools that can be used to facilitate peer feedback. So I've listed some digital tools here. For example, PeerGrade and Peer Studio are tools specifically designed to facilitate peer feedback. Google Jamboard or Miro allow students and teachers to interact on the same blank screen. They include features like sticky notes, drawing tools, and shapes. You can have students use these whiteboards to populate feedback on their peers' presentations or other activities. Again, we're not promoting any of these specific tools. We're just showing them as examples of what's available. So let's see another example of how to use one of these. So we used Google Forms to facilitate peer feedback using our earlier scenario. So instead of providing to the student feedback ourselves, we've asked her peers to provide the feedback. This will save us some time, and it'll also help the students' peers understand their own work more clearly. So we created a Google form that guides the students' peers to provide the feedback we need to assess whether the students have achieved the goal of our assignment. So our students can provide their feedback through a link, which also allows the feedback to be anonymous if we want. Then we can review the feedback in a summary report on the Google Form tab, or by downloading a Google Sheet as is shown in this table here. So now I'll turn it back over to Jill.
Remember to turn on my camera, but not my microphone. Has that happened to anyone else ever? Thank you, Beth. That was a lot of information about monitoring and feedback, and much of it is mentioned as well in the handout. I see in the chat there's a lot of questions about getting the handout. If you want to get in touch and give us your email, we'll do it, but I think that we can also send it out to you after the workshop if all else fails. So you will get them one way or another. But I'd like to bring Jessica and Mandy back now to hear from them about their experiences with monitoring students and providing feedback in a remote setting. So I'll begin by asking Jessica to share some of the methods that teachers used, that she saw teachers using, or that you, Jessica, saw teachers using to successfully monitor students and provide feedback during remote or hybrid learning.
They would sometimes send out, some short exit tickets. They would post them. We got very familiar with using the chat and Google Meets this year. So then they link something in there, and now Google Meets kind of, they've added some features like question and answer and polls. I don't know if anybody had a chance to use those this year, but using Google Forms or just posting a question in the chat before those features were readily available to gauge where their students were and to also give them some feedback that way. And with the Google form, they were able to give it more in a kind of a private way, but with the chat, they might be able to give some overall feedback to maybe a group of students that are even remote in separate places.
Great. Mandy, what about you? Some successful methods for monitoring students and providing feedback? What did your teachers use?
our language arts teachers use Google Docs to have their students provide their answers for research projects or whatever. And since we're a Google district, if that's assigned through Google Classroom, teachers can monitor that as it's being written. So students can be mid-paragraph and a teacher drop in and check on how things are going and provide feedback right there, either by voice or by text message within the Google Doc. Some of our younger grade teachers also used Flipgrid quite a bit. So they had the students would have an assignment in Flipgrid, do a little video, and then the teacher could provide feedback through video conferencing, not live, but for them for later if they needed to make corrections or just to tell them that they had done a good job.
Yeah, I worked with a teacher who used SurveyMonkey actually as sort of an exit ticket quiz mechanism so that she could, and SurveyMonkey will do like charts for you to, how many people answered this way. And she also, I don't know how this happened, why her students had phones, but they did. She made a QR code that kids could just take a picture of, at the end of class and do it real quick on their phone. So she was able to gather, to really get good, quick exit tickets done that way. So those are good ideas. But Mandy, thinking about going forward and how best to monitor students as we move into the new school year, when you have all kinds of different situations, do you have advice for people as they think about how to work this in?
So the same advice I had earlier on creating those connections to be intentional in your communication. I think it's important that you be intentionally planning how you're going to provide feedback to students. The days of holding your papers for a week before you grade them on Saturday is not really the most effective way to provide students with that information that they need to make corrections in their learning.
Yeah, that's a good point. And things have changed. Jessica, do you have something to add?
I do. I think, sticking to a routine of whether, I use the word assessment kind of loosely, but whether it's an assessment or exit ticket but a routine when you're going to have those things occur in your class so that they're prepared, that you're going to give feedback, in a timely manner after that. I think this year is kind of hard to do some pop quiz type of things with your remote students, but developing a routine in your classroom plus for your remote students so they can expect that feedback as well. Because if they're not there in person, even though they're checking in with you, it still may be difficult if they don't have a routine of when to expect that information to come back to them.
Right, and where to go.
Yes.
So Jessica, can you talk a little bit about anything that you found that you or your teachers found was difficult about collecting formative assessment information when you first switched to remote instruction, and sort of what people did about it to get to improve?
Yes, you can't collect those. If you do it on paper, you can't collect those papers. Our district had a system where some people could turn in packets for younger grades, but above second grade, you don't get that paper physically in your hand. So that was difficult. Even though it's 2021, I think a lot of teachers were kind of surprised that they found that difficult not to have that paper in hand and not to see that. So, utilizing what we use as a district, the Google products, they really had to jump in and start using those and really step outside their box. Especially with math teachers, probably that was a big one to figure out how students can show their work, what app or what application in Google is going to best do that. So that was a big workaround, but they found ways.
And do you think your teachers will continue to use the Google platform documents even if students are fully in person? Do you feel like that they may have discovered some advantages to doing that way?
I think so, and I think they've also discovered the big advantage is with COVID and everything, you can't wait until it happens. We waited until it happened, just by, nobody's fault, just happened. And we waited, and you really had to, like they keep saying, build a plane while you're, flying it. And so I think that they will continue to use those for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, it was sort of a digital revolution in a way that all teachers were, people were at all different places. There were people who had never even used Zoom before. and levels of learning were all different, and everybody, I think, took several steps up from where they were.
Yes, agreed.
Mandy, can you talk a little bit about what was difficult for your students, for your teachers in collecting formative assessment?
So we have common assessments several 6 weeks throughout the year, as well as benchmark testing. And one of the most difficult things was we have kids at home who are benchmark testing, and we're going to build curriculum for the next 6 weeks or around what our benchmark test says. However, mom, brother, sister, whomever may have taken that test. So we did have a learning curve, and are we going to draw those kids in and have them test here? Are we going to have to change the way we look at that information? What are we going to do about those big kinds of tests that we give? And we did a little bit of everything to make that work for everyone involved.
So it really sort of shown a highlight on how parents don't necessarily understand what benchmark testing is for, and that it's not a ding on their child, but it's actually a tool for helping their child. But I also understand their perspective of they have a frustrated child at home, and the temptation to help. So,
as well as embarrassed for example, as a kindergarten student, and teachers doing sight words and holds up the word. And so the student looks at the word and then he looks up and he says cat.
Yeah.
So mom didn't work with him this time on these sight words, and she doesn't want anybody to know that,
Right.
But convincing mom that I don't just want to give him a grade. These words are important before we can move on. So let's do something about that.
So an important lesson about, it's come up a number of times today, but lessons about what parents need to know if their child is learning from home, and coming up with ways to help parents understand what's going on and what's helpful and what's not. It's, again, COVID sort of just hit us in the side of the head. We didn't have time to do all that prep and planning, but now we do for the next year. So thinking ahead of time about, the extent that you're going to be using remote learning, what do the parents need to know for these students in this classroom is important to be intentional about. So thank you. And thank both of you again for sharing your, real life on the ground in the trenches stories with us. It's super helpful to hear all of that. So kudos, we appreciate you being here. I'm just going to wrap up this section now. Except for I can't do it when yes, I can. So, formative assessment, you remember, includes both formal and informal ways of monitoring student progress. And formative assessment information can be used to provide students with feedback about their learning progress, about their progress toward learning goals, but also teachers can use audio and video recordings to provide feedback, and students can provide peer feedback using online tools. That's like a recap of all of those things that we were just talking about. And hopefully along the way, you've written yourself some sticky notes and had some aha moments. But we want to just check in with you and hear some of your best ideas about monitoring students and providing feedback. So, if you were doing a check-in with your learners, this is a time where you might use Nearpod or Jamboard or Google Sheets or one of those other digital tools that we mentioned. But for us today, we're just going to use the chat to ask you to respond to this check-in question. And I noticed that earlier on, Catherine Martin put in, if you want to scroll up in the chat, a resource that she likes for providing student feedback. So you can look for that as well as sharing your ideas. So I'll give you some time to type. Oh, we've already got Catherine Martin. Thank you again. So Microsoft OneNote for grading math tests. She made a video feedback bank. Yes, because often you'll find that the students need the same lesson retaught, and so you can video it and send it to all the students that need it, right? Highlighting and writing capabilities were superior to pen and paper grading. So using those tools, you had more ability to be effective, and using different colors and sticky notes. So Catherine's a real fan of OneNote. So write that down on your list of things to try. Giving feedback through Google Docs and including links to videos and activities, so to present material in a new way in context. And that's one of those things that I have a feeling might continue going forward, is this sort of reteaching mechanisms using the teacher using video. If you notice that, you know, a section of your kids still don't get that thing about commas, making their homework to rewatch that video. Desmos Activity Builder through the teacher dashboard. That's one I hadn't heard of, so we should look into that. Seesaw, Google Forms, and the comment features. Yes, the comment features in Google Docs. It is nice to be able to sort of point your comment right towards the specific sentence in the writing that you're looking at. Waiting for other ideas to come in. The monitoring I found in talking with teachers was the most difficult for when in hybrid classes, because it required two different mechanisms for feedback. You know, the teacher in class could sort of look around and see who's doing their work and kind of look over shoulders and see what was happening, and then but they needed a completely different structure for monitoring students on who are remote and at home. And that one teacher who solved it actually set up sort of like 5 different computers. She got some donated laptops and set up 5 different chat rooms for her at home students to be in small groups. So people have come up with creative ideas. We've got mini conferences as a way for giving feedback. That was one of our ideas there too, about just having a really targeted, quick, specific conversation. And the conversation part overlaps with that engagement piece we talked about earlier, where students want to feel, you know, connected to schools and teachers. All right, so this is a tricky topic, but one that's worth considering and worth thinking about. I'm going to turn it over to Emma now to wrap up today's workshop and give you some details about what happens next.
Thanks so much, Jill. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We're just going to take a couple of minutes to wrap things up and discuss next steps. As we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, REL Appalachia is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. And one of the requirements of that funding is that we regularly gather feedback from participants. So we would like for you to help us continue to be able to provide free webinars like this one by taking just a couple of minutes to complete the stakeholder feedback survey. So we're going to drop the link to the survey in the chat now. And we're actually going to ask you to just take 2 minutes to complete the survey right now. So I'm dropping that link in the chat. If you have any trouble accessing it, I just tested it out a few minutes ago. It should be working, but let us know. So we're just going to give you 2 minutes here to complete that survey, and we really appreciate that feedback. So thank you so much. And then we'll come back together again.
And Emma, did you come up with ideas for other ways for people to get materials if they weren't able to get it during the
That's exactly right, Jill. I was just about to mention that when everybody came back together and we're done completing the survey, but we are going to email everybody the PDF copy of the handout. So thank you for noting that. We'll go ahead and make sure that we get all of the materials to you if you had some trouble accessing it in the chat today. So we have a list of people who attended, and we will email you. Okay, we'll give you just a few more seconds here, 30 more seconds to work on the survey. Okay, well, thank you all so much again for helping out with the survey and providing us with feedback. We really do appreciate it. So now that we have reached the end of the webinar, again, thank you, Jill, for bringing this up. We would like to just let you know that we'll send out the handout materials. If you had trouble accessing them, we will email them to you. And then we would also like to share our contact information with you. If you would like to reach out to us, please feel free to check out our website. You can see the link at the top here, as well as our email address. You can follow us on Twitter. And if you would like to, you can also subscribe to our REL Appalachia newsletter. So we encourage you to do all of these things if you would like to. So, thank you all again so much. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Have a great day. Thank you.